Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar, Hybrid Happiness, Is It Realistic? We're joined by Friday Pulse CEO and founder Nic Marks. He's going to take us through a few slides and talk us through the subject, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. But I think, Nic, you're happy for questions to come through as we go as well, aren't you? Oh, Nic, you're on mute. There we go.
Hi, sorry, I lost my button. Oh, at least that proves it's live. Thank you, Angela. Yeah, so do pop anything in the chat as you go along. Angela's certainly going to keep a lookout on that. I'm going to have a question quite close to the beginning anyway. So I want to sort of say about, well, I'm going to talk about hybrid happiness. Is it realistic? Must admit, I've quite enjoyed forming my position on this, let's put it that way, and what I think about it, and looking at quite a lot of the research that's out there. So I hope that I'm providing a fresh angle on what is a very present issue for lots of us. So firstly, just to remind you who I am, if you don't know, I'm a statistician by trade, former TED speaker. It's now quite a long time ago, as you can see from then, and I've got long COVID hair at the moment, but it will probably cut soon. This is a brief bio of me. I went to Cambridge to do maths and statistics, and then ended up doing systems thinking. In the 90s, did a lot of stuff on quality of life studies, was a consultant, organizational change, trained as a therapist, actually, became a parent. That's quite a life-changing experience. In the 2000s, I founded what became the Centre for Wellbeing at the New Economics Foundation, probably most famous for the Happy Planet Index, 5 Ways to Wellbeing, which is what I did my TED talk on. And then after that, I founded the business that's become Friday Pulse. And we launched Friday Pulse as a platform about 2019, actually, but really the 2000s. So that's just a bit about who I am. And so the next thing is, what do you think? So just in the chat, I mean, what are your feelings about hybrid? Is it absolutely an total good? Is it a total bad? Are you in between? So just good to know what you're thinking out there as we start this. So just pop in the chat whether you feel that your instinct is that hybrid is really good or really bad. So just pop that in there. Thanks. Well, there doesn't seem to be people thinking a bit in between. So I'm going to actually, this is my position, which is at the moment I'm quite in between. So I don't know if you know the Chinese farmer fable, where there is a farmer and his horse runs away, and his neighbors all come around that evening and they say, "Oh, I'm very sorry, your horse has run away." And he replies, "Well, maybe it's bad." And the next day, the horse comes back with 6 wild horses, and the neighbors come around again and they go, "Well, that's fantastic." And the farmer goes, "Maybe." And the next day his son tries to okay, the chat is disabled. Okay, well, then that's why there was nothing in there. I don't know if I can enable the chat. I don't know. Anyway, the son is trying to tame one of them, and he breaks his leg, and the neighbors come around and say, "Oh, that's terrible." And the farmer replies, "Maybe." And the next day the army come around looking for conscripts, and they don't take his son because he's got a broken leg. So the neighbors come around and say, "Wow, that's fantastic." And he replies, "Maybe." And I think that's the maybe is why I feel on hybrid at the moment. It's not the end of the story. There's quite a lot to play out about it. And there are benefits and there are costs, and they may lay in different places with power. And I'm going to talk about that a bit as we go on. So this is what I'm going to talk about. What's the data on how hybrid we actually are? Is there a widening gap between employees and employers? You know, here is that bargain, that psychological contract about work changing. What are some of the dangers of remote working, and how a happiness lens can really help? cut through this a bit. So, and I think the answer is to make in-person attractive and productive, and to make hybrid as well too. So there's something going on there. And then we have time for questions at the end. So here is some data that came out recently in the Financial Times. It is Google mobility data, and it's basically showing that in the UK and the US, a lot of people are still not traveling to work. It's about 22% down in the UK from pre-COVID, which is a lot. And you'll see that Europe is much less down. So in other words, we seem to be working from home much more in the UK and the US and Canada than other countries. There are some key differences, particularly about the UK, which is that we are a very service-based economy. So there's a lot of people that can work from home. And we also have a lot of professional services, which is also true. The ITC and professional services are probably going different ways with what they think about hybrid, by the way. The commuting in the UK is more expensive and longer and probably grimmer and more unhappy. Though wherever we look in the world, the commute to work is probably the least happy activity of the day, if we got data on that. London is especially guilty of this. So the most unhappy regular thing that happens a day is the commute to work. The second most unhappy thing is the commute back from work. And the third is work itself. So it's not a very good story. We obviously prefer doing things we've got more discretionary choice about what we do our time with. So that's maybe not surprising, but commuting is particularly unhappy. And there's also something different, which is the labour market in the UK is probably more flexible and and less regulated, which allows actually more flexibility in there. So there's another one in the FT in the same article, which is about how attached to hybrid working are, and actually 23% of UK workers say they would quit if they were forced to work full time at the office. So that's a pretty strong endorsement of hybrid, really. So as you can again see, it's slightly lower in other countries. This is actually number of hours that people are working for hybrid at the moment. So in different countries, number of days, sorry. So you can see the global average is just under 1.5 days a week. In the UK, it's almost 2. Canada even higher, US a bit lower, France and Germany a bit lower. So that's actually how many days a week, pretty much. This was in February 2022 that this data came from. It came from something called the Work From Home Consortium, which is a group of North American universities and the European Bank. So it's pretty good data. This is actually, if you ask people how many days they want to work, you can see the global average is a little bit high, about 1.7. Nearly everybody wants to work a little bit longer than they are having at the moment. Actually, the UK, Canada, and Australia are, about the same. So maybe have it about in line with what people's desires are. But the next one is the worrisome one, which is actually what do employers want? And this is what employers say they're planning for hybrid. So, so you've got about 0.7 days globally. So in the UK, about 1 day a week. So about half of what people are asking for. The US, about the same. So you can see that there's actually a gap between what employees are wanting, and I'm with the employees here, and actually what the employers might be wanting. And we're into a power tussle in some ways that I think is going to come. As we come at this, and we'll probably see a lot of differences. Well, we are seeing a lot of differences already. So we have a gap opening. There's as I said, 1.7 days desired versus 0.7 days planned. 76% of senior leaders think it's very important that everybody's back. That was a Slack Future Forum survey. The gap is widening. So with knowledge workers, about 80% want flexibility where they work. So that's hybrid. 94 when they work. So that's more flexi time, which has been around for quite a time. So there's a real demand for autonomy coming from employees here. And working parents are particularly keen on it. So 60% of working mothers want to work remotely 3 to 5 days a week, and working fathers 2, as in not 2 days a week, as in 50% of them want to as well. So there's absolutely a massive demand for hybrid that's happening. But we also need to note there's some cautionary tales here. So there are some dangers of, especially of fully remote working, which is obviously different than hybrid. So fully remote working has been researched quite extensively for quite a long time. So this guy, Peter Capelli, has written a book called The Future of the Office. And he was citing research because teleworking started in the 1970s due to the LA smog, and then in the 2000s because of high office prices. And fully remote over the long term for the employee is pretty bad on virtually every count. There's fewer promotion opportunities if you work fully remote, and there are lower wage increases. So basically, by being not in person, you lose out on opportunities and finance and money over time. It's also not great for the employer because over a long period of time, there was lower engagement and people identified less with the organization. So this is all pre-COVID. So there's obviously something massively gone on that's different about COVID. But there are alarm bells about fully remote. Basically, people get isolated and forgotten. And so there's real dangers with that, both for the individual and the organization. The pandemic was obviously also this extraordinary, unexpected, unasked for experiment. I just went to a conference the week before last, and I saw this paper, which is forthcoming from a great researcher called Claudia Senek. She's at Sorbonne University. So she's using the UK household panel survey, longitudinal survey. She's looking at who worked at home and who became fully remote, who previously weren't. So the graph on the right is showing that levels of people working from home in the UK were about 3 or 4% before COVID, and they rose immediately to nearly 60% and then adjusted down back to about 42, 43%. So this is in 2020, her research is based on. So the UK household panel survey is great data because it's tracking the same people through time. So what she was able to do was to look at somebody who previously worked in the office and then someone that now works fully remote, and you're watching the same person through time. Yeah. And she had 9,284 people in the subsample of the British household panel. And what she found was that people's mental health deteriorated working from home, particularly their ability to concentrate, their self-confidence, and feeling useful. Note, this is during the pandemic, so there's an awful lot going on, as I'll show you other data, but basically they deteriorated compared to the people who were working in person, for example. And it was especially bad for women with children. No significant impact on men with children, but also remember a lot of women with children were juggling homeschool working as well. So there was a lot going on there. But you know, this isn't surprising. I think my next slide is going to be, you know, how the pandemic affected everybody's employee happiness at work. This is a graph that came out in the World Happiness Report in 2021, and it's the weekly happiness of people, of workers, UK workers. Don't worry about all the lines, it just looks a bit prettier that way, but they're just different types of workers. So this, if you can see my thing, was the pre-COVID, and then COVID hitting in March 2020, and then people slowly recovering back towards where they were. It was the Eat Out to Help Out summer in the UK, and then dropping again in the autumn. And so the backdrop to Claudia's work is this situation. She had got measures, well, as COVID hit right the way through the year, and so she's basically measuring this period. So everybody was down, but particularly what she was finding when she was comparing was comparing the people who had previously been in the office were now remote. And obviously she had people in the sample to compare that to, who were people who were fully working in the office or in their van or whatever they were doing on site, and had gone back to it. So the mental health of the people who were working at home was worse than them, had deteriorated worse than them, and particularly, as she says, working mothers. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of things to think about actually how it affects people. And of course, some of these things are slightly invisible. We don't notice small decreases in our mental health. So are we noticing these things catching up with us? So it's probably only by measuring carefully you start to spot them coming up. Angela, do shout if there's something in the chat that I need to attend to. Yeah.
There's nothing that you need to, there's no questions, but there's been a few comments on what hybrid means to people now that they're able to share in the comments. So Belinda's saying that they're currently going through a consultation process with hybrid put into contracts of minimum 1 day, and Belinda and her team have all agreed to those changes. Someone else is saying that a couple of people are agreeing that hybrid is the future, and it's something that we need to accept and find the most effective model for, which I think is kind of what you're talking through about how we find that model.
Yeah, totally. Thanks a lot. So this period that her research on was a difficult period, full stop. And actually, this is the same data. The data comes from a YouGov survey, which they do every week, measuring the mood of the nation. So this is taking that same data. It's exactly the same data, only one line though. This is the dip in March. This is the eat out to help out summer. This is the autumn it saw. The graph stopped there, but that's Christmas. Always a peak and happening at Christmas. And then there was the time we were locked down in January, February, and climbing back up again. Now, the interesting thing about having a graph like this is that we can look at our own data on it too. So this is actually comparing the Friday Pulse data, because at Friday Pulse, we measure the happiness of all our clients at the same time. So we can overlay it with that. So you can see the same dip, the same rise back, but no second and third dips. And basically, I think what that means is that things can go under pressure, but what we do about the pressures we receive allows us to be more resilient or not. So I would claim that our clients were more resilient. They had a drop, but not as high. Sorry, these just slightly got out of line. I hadn't noticed that, but they had a drop not quite as big. So then 18% drop compared to 33% drop. They also, to get back to the 90% level, they had a faster recovery, 3 weeks instead of 13 weeks. And then finally, if you look at over the whole period, our clients were 4% lower, they absolutely were impacted by COVID, but the whole of the UK was 14% lower. So when we get into talking about being intentionally hybrid or intentionally how we do things matters massively. There's the averages, there's what goes on in the whole population, but of course, they're enlightened employers, they're enlightened leaders, and they're ones that are less so. So, so it's quite a big difference. And the reason why we measure happiness and why I think, these things matter is because there's just masses of evidence that happy teams are successful teams. So they have higher retention, higher productivity. We've got no companies with good cultures have got a higher share price growth. They're more creative and innovative. And then if you're a team leader, it's very important because they're less stressful and much easier to manage. Of course, it takes time to build happy teams, but the reward is all absolutely there. So I'm obviously a massive advocate for finding happy hybrids because I think it's great. But there are challenges in there. And what I think is that a happiness lens can really help with that. So Friday Pulse, we've developed a model about what are the key drivers of happiness at work. And what I mean by that, I mean that we've got happiness, we measure it. We tend to measure it weekly. There's some of the researchers measuring it just at a single point in time. Can we look at what drives the changes of that from the sort of underlying behaviors and values in the organization? And this model of connect, be fair, empower, challenge, inspire comes out of that. Now, it's not exactly new science because you can see in there, if you look at the right-hand three, empower, challenge, inspire, that's Daniel Pink really in drive with his autonomy, mastery, and purpose. He, of course, was influenced very heavily, though not always admitting it, by DC and Ryan's self-determination theory, which is relationships, autonomy, and competence. You can see in there Maslow, if you want to talk about fairness as a sort of basic need, then you can see relationships and autonomy and belongingness and transcendence, I guess, is what he's one up there is inspire. So this is just basically what we normally find when we talk about human motivation, things that drive good outcomes for people. But we can look at what happened during COVID from this lens and see, what's interesting in here and what possibly was coming out about why people like hybrid, because clearly a lot of people do like hybrid, not everybody, but a lot of people do. So we do a culture profile with our clients, which is 15 questions. These are the 15 questions. So 3 for each of the 5 ways. So it's a nice short questionnaire. If you know the Gallup Q12, it's not a million miles from the Gallup Q12, but if you came to the last webinar, you'll know why I don't like the Gallup Q12. It mixes a lot of timeframes and is sort of not transparent exactly what it's trying to do. But basically, we're trying to help team leaders, people leaders in the organization identify what things are most likely to impact the happiness of their employees, and therefore unlock this alignment between happiness and productivity in an organization. And we can see how these changed during COVID. So over the period, we saw increases in some areas. So strengths use, influencing decisions, creativity, constructive feedback, and learning all improved. And remember, they're improving at a difficult time. So that's quite interesting that those indicators improved. And the ones that got under pressure and started dropping were predominantly relational. So team relationships, friendships at work, work-life balance, appreciation, and actually pride, which in some ways is a measure of belongingness and organization. So some of these relational ones, particularly, work-life balance, relationship between home and work, that's the particular case. It was actually the biggest dropping one in that first year. And actually, I want to do a study over the summer. It's one of my summer jobs to look at how all of these variables have moved this year, because I've kind of been waiting for things to settle down before we release new benchmarks, but I'm not sure it's ever going to settle down. So I'm going to, grass the nettle and create new benchmarks for all of these variables where we are now. So, but these going ups and downs are interesting, and it kind of ties into what do employees want. As I said, a lot of people do. There's 97% support for hybrid working. This comes from a report called Work After Lockdown. People are saying the calculations are 4% more efficient working from home than on business premises. So it doesn't seem to be the productivity drop. There's a willingness to pay, which is basically that sort of question where people go, well, if you could work 2 or 3 days at home, how much salary reduction you'd get? And when people answer that question, which is a hypothetical question, so has some problems with it, they say they take a 5% reduction in salary to work 2 or 3 days from home, which is kind of interesting. With productivity going up, there might be something for the employer in there. 15%, as we already said, would quit if they were forced to work fully in the office. So there's a real power dynamic going on here, and a very interesting one, which is very, very new. This is a quote from the report Work After Lockdown. 6 months before the pandemic happened, if you'd ask anyone here, would you be able to do your job from home? They'd all say no. And we all discovered we could work from home. So, the cat is out of the bag, as this report was called, no going back. There is no going back. And they identified lots of gains, this Southampton University report. So it wasn't about Southampton University, it was about the UK. Improved productivity. I think the second one, sorry, is particularly interesting. There was increased managerial trust in employees of remote working. I think this could be the key thing, one of the key things going on here. New management skills, new digital skills, better quality meetings. Quite a lot of people report that meeting time has dropped as they got more efficient with the meetings. And I think we all know that meetings can be long-winded. So things were going on. Obviously reduced commuting and travel costs, which is really important, the cost of living crisis. But there were some losses, so there was a social deficit. So my image of that is that, I think pre-COVID, we had a social capital in our teams, in our organizations. And in a way, over that year, 2 years, that social capital was depleted somewhat as we ran down the stock of trust and just bonding that we had with other people, and not deliberately, but there was sort of, that just sort of happens. We brought new people in to the team, our teams, and sometimes it was difficult to integrate them and onboard them. So there was definitely some things going on there. So Employee fatigue has been very well documented. I think we almost certainly have a lot of, to call it post-traumatic stress disorder is too much, but there's been a lot of stress around, and that will take some years to come out. Work intensification, has people, been so focused on what they're doing, they're not seeing the connections, or they're just getting drained from it. I think labour market exit in this context meant people leaving the job market early because, they found other things to do. So there are some significant gains and some issues about losses. But and then this was their conclusion: hybrid doesn't work by accident. It only works if it's planned and structured. In other words, it's a plea for intentional. How intentional are we about hybrid, and how we need to be intentional? There's more in the chat, Angela. Is there anything to report there?
No questions yet in the chat.
Yeah. So I firstly want to do a word of warning. So I listened to this really good podcast. I listened to it quite regularly. It's called The Melting Pot. It's actually done by one of our partners, Don Monkhouse, and he was talking with this guy, Peter Capelli, who is the guy that wrote The Future of the Office, an American guy, a very experienced sort of researcher, and he is not suggesting one thing or the other. He's observing what's happened, and his warning is about power. Where's the power? Over the last 20, 30 years, the power has shifted from, we did have strong unions and employees had increasing rights and all sorts of things. And that has really changed, so the power has typically been with employers over the last 10, 20 years, and we see that in things, the unions are weak, the gig economy has grown. So why will employers agree to be hybrid? So, us on this call, we might all see the sensibility, but I think in the economy generally, there's going to have to be identified benefits for the employer about this, because, there's something, I don't know if I put it, the CFOs might like real estate savings, they might be able to save that. But if we're hybrid, there's not necessarily that there are going to be many real estate benefits. If you go fully remote, that's very clear. If you are hybrid, do you need smaller office spaces because you rotate teams? That's possible. That is possible, and some people are trying to do that. Or are you trying to have the whole organization in a couple of days a week? So that doesn't actually mean that you can have any less real estate. So there were, if you're a small organization, you might just meet as a team one day a week in a co-working space. That's possible. But there's not necessarily big real estate savings. So the power system is what basically his warning was about. And again, I think that's a plea for us to be intentional about what we're doing. And we need to balance the business and employee needs. So at the moment, we've got employees saying they kind of want 2 days a week hybrid, and employers saying we're going to offer one. So there's that sort of first tension. What's absolutely certain is that one size doesn't fit all. So if you think about those two types of employees who are mainly office bound, you've got ITC workers, and you've got sort of business services, so accountancies, things like that. The latter, financial services, are definitely going, we want more to be in the office. ITC seems to be saying we can even go fully remote. So there's different sectors which are going in different directions. I think no one knows exactly what's going to happen. We don't know how the story is going to end. And so my advice really becomes to run experiments and to measure the impacts of those and to try things, which I'm sure is what a lot of you are doing. But I think thinking we're going to get it right straight away is unlikely. There's going to be all sorts of edge cases. What do you do? Well, anyway, I'll go through some more things first, but I think there are all sorts of things which are going to be challenging, but there are some clues from a happiness angle. So if we go back to, yes, you.
I was just going to say, we've got a couple of comments in the chat. So, and Roy is asking questions, I think, as well. So Roy's saying many who champion hybrid, remote as positive do so from their personal perspective rather than the larger view, me versus we as a company. Do you have any suggestions on how to improve the employees' consideration of both perspectives? Additionally, the ability to work remotely is likely contingent on other co-workers not being able to work remotely. Curious if any suggestions on improving that understanding and appreciation. So it's that kind of, how do we encourage people to think about the other perspective, not just from their own angle?
I think what I'm going to make a plea, Roy, and nice you're on the webinar, Roy. Roy's one of our longest standing clients, this trade-off between the individual and the organization, I think, is what has to be renegotiated. And I think, yeah, I'm going to go through a few more slides, Roy, so let's just hold it slightly, because I'm going to get to some of that, and to answer it fully I would steal my own thunder, so I'm going to go on a little bit longer, but I'm totally with you on what the question is. Yeah. So the happiness perspective, we have these 5 ways, and we have it underneath what the questions are. But the 5 ways are really our motivations, you know, and they're very related to what we feel. So when we feel well connected, we've got, you know, much more those sort of relationship emotions, such as affiliation and caring. When we're treated fairly, we feel more content and satisfied. When we're empowered, we feel more energized. When we're challenged, we feel more curious, interested. And when we're inspired, we feel, you know, more joyous, more, you know, just more inspired. Actually, it's probably a perfectly good word to use for it. And so these are very connected to how we're being. And the issue sometimes can be that some of them feel more present to us than others. So the ones around learning can sometimes take a little longer to come through in the time frame. So I think some of what's going on is that people are recognizing how it suits them from their home life and from things like that, but they might not be recognizing what they could possibly lose in the equation too. So when we go back to this, you know, COVID was this very up and down experience for us. I sometimes say happiness is a wave. It goes up and down. I'm sure I've talked about that before. Don't think of it as a static thing, you're happy or not. It's always moving. But it's quite incredible that we had these positives come out. And it's really interesting that they come out in the areas of empower and challenge. And they didn't come out in connections. We didn't get more connected particularly, but they really came out here. And what does that mean? Is that telling us that as we think about getting the best out of hybrid, we're actually helping with making people feel empowered and challenged and possibly even inspired more, and we're trading off with that, like, okay, well, we need to think about how do we help them connect, because connect is this cornerstone, the foundation of happiness and well-being at home and at work. And so it could be that people, particularly if they're longer term employees, have got their network of relationships. So in a way, they're satiated with that. But of course, people coming into the organization, there's going to be people they never would meet. There's people that they would never learn from, or they wouldn't learn from them. So there's this complex dynamic going on around it all. So and it actually reminded me of research I've done before. So this is about organizational size, and I think there will be different things going on with hybrid with organizational size, but this is just the happiness of employees dependent on size of organization. And there's a general rule: the larger the organization, the less happy people are. It's not it's a reasonable effect. It is actually a big effect, but it's lumpy. You know, our data won't have been absolutely perfect, but the trend I'm pretty confident of. But if you look at the 5 ways, you can see they all dropped. But the one that dropped the most was empower. Challenge is actually the lowest anyway, but the empower one was the one that had the biggest drop. So people in smaller organizations feel more empowered. And I think one of the things that is happening with hybrid is people feel more personally taken care of, that they're actually, you know, they're given choices about, you know, where they work, when they work. So they're feeling their autonomy more. And this is a critique of how people were managed before the pandemic, which is that, you know, the fact that those variables have risen so much is because they were coming in some ways from a low base. And so, you know, and you think during the lockdowns, there was this extraordinary alignment that went on. You know, we all were in this together. Everybody was in it. And actually, in a way, everybody was fighting for their job. You know, we knew colleagues, we knew friends who were made redundant or put on furlough here in the UK. So it was a very difficult challenge. And we knew that everybody in the world was facing the same thing. So there was this united spirit that went on in this extraordinary time. And then what happened was line managers, employers went, we trust you to get on with the job. We can't monitor you. I mean, though some people did put in some monitoring software, but let's not go there. But, you know, we trust you to get on with it. And in a sense, the employer absolutely rose to the challenge, you know, and it was in everybody's self-interest because I wanted to keep my job. I knew it wasn't my employer's fault. We just had to get on with it. And we did. And there's there's absolutely this reflection that comes out of CEO surveys and things like that, is that people can't believe how well everybody did, how they survived it so well. So there was this huge alignment and trust. And as that Southampton report goes, in a way, there's no going back. You can't put it back in there, but you know, the trust needs to continue. And there probably were all sorts of things that happened. So these are some questions really to consider, which is that I think, but haven't actually got evidence on this, but were managers more intentional and engaged during COVID? You know, I think they were suddenly checking in with their team every week, which they probably didn't do when they were in the office, because they felt that, you know, they were a team, they could see people, they could read the room. Were they reading the room? You know, we think sometimes overconfident of our abilities to do these things, but suddenly they were checking on every week. And I should think for some employees, it was the first time that their line manager had asked them how they were, and also meant it. And they were also allowed to say that they weren't feeling okay. That was acceptable. So it was a change, I think, in that very fundamental relationship between the manager and the team member that went on, and the organization suddenly caring. And so did these unique circumstances actually make everybody more what could be called autonomy supportive? That's a phrase I get from a paper by DC and Ryan, so very famous American researchers on self-determination theory. So, you know, can we maintain that? So if could be one of the great goods that's come out about how we work, is that suddenly employees were trusted more, that team leaders showed they cared more. And that simple human contact, which is all about happiness, really changed how things are and changed how they could be. So for me, that's a really, I'd love people's thoughts on it as we go into the chat, really. But so at the end of the day, I think what we need to do is to remember the lessons and try things out. I think most of us already are. You know, I've got one client who they're bringing people in 1 to 2 days a week, and they first of all called it Mandatory Monday, and then they thought that was a bit prescriptive, so now it's Team Tuesday. And they have a really different special day on a Tuesday. We'd have lunch together. They are about 40 people, this organization, 40, 50 people, you know, and they have a lot of sharing, a lot of whatever. And then people are home for 3 or 4 days for the rest of it. They can be in the office however long they want to be, but they're really asked to be in one day. But again, you don't get that real estate saving with that model. But run experiments and measure outcomes. And so try things. And measuring is really, you know, what we do at Friday Pulse, so you can track that. This is actually real data from one team that's intentionally using Friday Pulse, and they've increased massively over a 6-month period. But if you use it, you can check what's going on. I'm very keen that we ask people after an experience how it was, rather than asking people what they think they want to do. So when you ask people a question, how many days do you want to come back in the office? And perhaps they say, no, I'm very happy working from home. They've actually forgotten what the office is like. So actually, I think it's really important we bring people back in and then ask them how it was, rather than how you think it's going to be. So hypothetical questions are always a bit weaker, much weaker statistically, much less robust. We're very bad at imagining what our futures could be and how we will feel in them particularly. So Friday Pulse can really help you track that. And then we do the quarterly culture profile, which are the questions I was showing you, so you can see how they change with our heat maps and benchmarks and whatever like that. So for those who don't know, it's a holistic platform. We do weekly check-ins, quarterly deeper dives using the 5 ways, and we create predictive analytics for people. We really try and make it so that it's getting this alignment between senior leaders, team leaders, and employees. That's what we want to do. Hybrid is just a special case of that. It has to work for the employees, the team leaders too. There is a scheduling extra problem that goes on, which makes the complexity to work for certain. But I'm still, as ever, convinced there's this massive alignment. So I think we can make hybrid happiness, but it's not going to happen by accident. That's just about our products. We've got white papers you can download as well. So that is my webinar talk, and we've got time for questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and people put questions in.
Yeah, so we had one from Shrikan earlier. I'm just scrolling up to find it. So is it advisable to have different models for different teams, different departments within the company?
I think, I mean, it really depends. I would think by your question, it probably is, in the sense that there are very different jobs within organizations. You know, if you've got a tech team, they might be very different than other teams going on there. I think the thing to remember, so, and I'm going to say this about tech teams, so this is definitely stereotyping, but there will be some people who want to hide at home, and particularly with tech work, which is very piecemeal and you can do your work totally from home. I would really worry about those longer term mental health issues going on there, because more people get isolated. You know, there can sometimes be personality types that really keep themselves to themselves. I think it's really important to support the introverts and the ones who might find it struggle with relationships, actually, that they will benefit a lot from coming in the office sometimes. So I think if you have a space that people can come together and they're still commutable, that you haven't been hiring for entirely remote, which a lot of people have been doing, then bringing people together face to face is qualitatively different. You know, we certainly find that as a team, don't we, Angela? We probably only get together once a fortnight, probably some of you once a week, but it makes a huge difference. So there will be different policies, and I think, you know, how much do we adapt to individuals' needs? And if you just go to individuals' needs, you're going to have people saying, well, I want to do Tuesdays at home because my daughter plays football. We can say that now, that the women have won the football, which is very good. But and other people might say Wednesday I want to be. So how much do you want teams to be together? I think there's going to have to be, probably, although mandatory Monday is not exactly the right word, but some mandatory about when people come together. So, we've got one colleague we haven't seen since before the pandemic, and I think we should encourage her to come and see us, don't you, Angela?
Totally. We've got a few more sort of comments coming in from people. So the ratio I'm seeing a lot, where I undertake health and safety site assessments in 3 days in the office, 2 days at home. This seems the most common at the moment. So sort of a view, I guess, across organizations that you're working with. And then someone saying, I work in a medium-sized trans-European finance company. Hybrid is part of our model, but we have a lot of thinking, experimentation to do and to embed it. Making it work depends on having a strategy, having trained and supportive leadership, making sure technology works for hybrid and easy to use, and aligned policies and processes within hybrid. So it's the empowerment is really important, and I think that's one of the things that you're talking about, that we help to measure. And actually that comment, the same person is saying, what lessons do you think we can learn from multinational teams who've addressed some of these issues for some time?
Yeah, I mean, actually, you might have more of an answer. I haven't worked in a multinational team. We do have some clients, but I'm not sure I'm close enough. So you might have better answer that to me, Angela, or someone else might do. But I think it's about being intentional and checking in. Zoom and other ways is certainly better than not having it. But have you got experience that with some of our clients, Angela?
Yeah, I mean, I think clients, they will have some experience of it, but I guess when it's multinational teams, they tend to at least still be a team. They have colleagues around them still, and this is a kind of different sort of scenario, isn't it, where you're trying to have people who are all working from different locations when everyone is remote, and then you've got that situation where some are remote and some are in person. I know there's been some talk about, if everyone is if one person is not in the same space, everyone is online in a meeting, and debate about whether that works or not.
Yeah, it's certainly difficult. I think team size makes a difference too. I don't know if any of you have been noticing this, but I think that particularly online, but probably in person too, that if you're having a free running conversation, then probably 4 or 5 is the maximum number of people you should have in a meeting. And psychologically, this goes to something which is called mentalizing. And mentalizing is our ability to put ourselves in someone else's mind. And we can only hold 3 or 4 other people in mind at one time. It's kind of why if you go to a party and there's 3 or 4 of you standing together, if someone else joins, very quickly the conversation splits into 2, because the conversation can't flow when there's too many people in it. So you split to make a more human size. So I think that when we're thinking about how we work hybrid and remotely in teams, I think team size is a really critical part of it. And how we work, and particularly project size, we're working on things together, keep them small, dynamic, only come together when you're information sharing or you're whatever. So size is important too. I mean, with the international ones, you've got time differences. But in a way, we're starting to have time differences in the same time zone, because some people want to finish at 3 to do the kids and then work back after supper. And in lots of ways, that's just fine if we understand what the outcome of work is. And I think that's the maturation process that we're going through that has been absolutely made much, much quicker by COVID, is that this trust and the trust, the psychological trust between the team leader and the team member, the employee and the employee. And I think that's the really optimistic thing to be coming out of this. And then I do, as I say, sometimes get worried about those hard power dynamics that are just brute force of big organizations. You know, they will do what they want and they will put a policy and make it. So, you know, I think for small and medium-sized organizations, I think hybrid is going to work very well. I think big ones might start doing other things. We'll see. We do not know the end of the story.
And then I think this must have been when you were talking about, you know, giving things a go and then asking people what it was like, because the feedback in the chat was, I've gone into the office for a couple of collaboration sessions in the last month and didn't realize how nice it was and how much I'd missed physically seeing colleagues. I definitely feel the same way when you have that high of seeing people in person that you haven't seen for so long.
Yeah, that's my thing about, I think it's really hard for us to understand how it will feel when we do meet people and how much better it is than we remember. I mean, obviously, if you hated your boss, it was quite nice working from home because you could hide, yeah. But that's bad management, full stop. But if we have well managed and well led teams, then it's a joy to see people. I mean, I think certainly at Friday Pulse, I think we love hybrid, don't we? I can't see us going back to fully in the office. But I don't think fully remote would work for us either. So, and we're probably be more leaning towards the 1-2 days meeting each other, 3-4 working from home. But it's in that mix, isn't it? So the UK data was at the moment it's 2, and that's what people want in the UK. And so that's 3 days in the office, 2 at home. But there'll be ones that are the other way around. And what's the minimum? Is it 1 day a week? Is it 1 day a fortnight? Is it, what is the minimum? But the collaboration, the thing will be, in a measurement term, pure measurement term, are we measuring the right variables? So the things that are always difficult to measure are the dogs that don't bark, to sort of misquote Sherlock Holmes, is that the innovation that doesn't happen, the learning that doesn't happen, that's very hard to measure because what are you comparing it to, particularly if you're a small organization. But those are the alerts, I think, from both individual happiness, career progression point of view, and organizational progression, is, are you missing those things that happen better together? And the creativity of a team is greater than the creativity of the individuals, because teams, people exchange ideas and they build on them. And so obviously a team must be more innovative than a set of individuals. And if we go too remote, then we just have a lot of people who are individuals working. We really need that collaboration to go on. That can happen remotely, but that's the thing to watch out for, particularly.
And someone's asked, how would you suggest we manage employees who don't want to work hybrid and just want to work from home? Like, how do we check in on their mental health, for example?
Yeah, I think this is going to be the difficult one, isn't it? And I think within if you're an organization of any size, you're going to have a spectrum of people. Well, I wasn't using it on this term of the spectrum, but you're going to have people that do want to hide away. You're going to have some people who their kids are so important that they really want to be absolutely very present for them, and they want to juggle work around it, and they may be self-sacrificing. So the ones who are doing it for kids and family, the ones who are naturally introverted or naturally shy of people, or even don't like mixing with people, they're the ones to watch out for, in a sense. And I think it's daring to have those conversations. If they are local and you're their team leader, go and meet them in a coffee shop near where they live, and just go and take them out for coffee. That might be effortful, but I would go and meet them one-to-one and see what's going on for them, even if they don't want to come back in the office. And when people do come back into the office, and in fact, I put this in my first slide and I've actually forgotten to talk about it very much, is that I think luring people back in the office, I think it is the social side of it. And eating lunch together might sound a really simple thing to do, but I delighted in learning this the other week, which is that the word company comes from bread together, breaking bread together. And so it's why we say they're good company, but we use it for business too. And I think that actually, eating together is a great way. So, and encouraging people, I know we've got a lot of people with diverse teams, encourage people to bring in food from their own country, from their own ethnicity, or whatever it is. And so people bring in and give food. So you get into that generosity, but you can obviously just bring in your own food too. But I think doing things together and having, getting people to share ideas. So it might be you get cross-team people to talk about things, that are going on in their team. You might get people to talk about things straight out of work. What's a skill I learned from my favorite hobby, and doing a 3-minute stand-up on that, and at lunchtime. Things that bring people together, and understanding that is work. That's not, it's fun. Someone's just put, good teams eating lunch together retain their staff more. I've never seen data on it, but I would expect that you're right. And I think that the more personable teams are, and the more that we share things together, that the things that go better. And this is the intentional hybrid. So make the day. So the Team Tuesday organization I'm talking about, I wrote it on my blog last week about them. So if you want to go and read about it, the Team Tuesday people, they've made a lot of effort to make that Tuesday fun. She said she's still missing 2 people that don't come in, and she's worried about them. So I think you have to go the extra mile. Literally, I would literally go and have a coffee with them locally and see what's going on. Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think those are all really nice ideas to build up that connection back with them. Check that they're okay. I think these were comments shared when you were talking about, is it the same that you do for everyone, or do you have to do different things for different teams? So someone's saying you actually go for equity here, not equality. You can't have the same prescription for all teams. Teams and team dynamics and job natures are different, and you can't apply the same model for all.
You can't. And I still think it's going to be hard for people to say you can't work from home ever now. But there are people who are saying that. So, and maybe it works better out in sort of rural areas where there's not a terrible commute and people live very locally. But it's definitely something that cat's out the bag, isn't it? So, yeah.
And then we've got a question. Do we have any more recent data on it's an employee's world, as so many people have taken the decision to be self-employed rather than employed? I think
that's the bit in the Southampton report about exited the labour market. I didn't really go down that, look at the data on there. There will be data on that. I've been looking at a lot of employee skills survey data. I might go into that in the next webinar about how training is changing and not for the better. Self-employed, I don't know whether things gone up. It wouldn't be very difficult to look at something like the household labour survey in the UK. There'd be data on that. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, clearly some people have made huge lifestyle choices, but of course they might be reversing those already. Not everybody who makes a lifestyle choice sticks with it. But yeah, there definitely have been changes. It would be interesting to see that data. So I don't know that, Lorraine.
And so what would you suggest should be the steps to do hybrid intentionally?
Well, it's listening, isn't it? It's listening and talking and deciding together. And there are going to be trade-offs. There are going to be some difficult conversations. So I don't think you can suit everything to everybody. It makes the team leader's job more, there's an added layer of complication because you are trying to coordinate schedules. But I think if you came to the principle that if a team, I would do it. So if you have a team that works together, and of course, some organizations are more matrix and or whatever, I would say that the team has to choose a day when they're all together, at least a day. And it might be that your work needs to be 3 days, but that you need that because you want these collaborations to happen. But then you get into large organizations, the inter-team collaborations need to happen. So it makes it harder if you never bump into people, if you can never see them in person. And then there are going to be these huge issues about career progression. So my youngest is 23 and just starting out in one of the accountancy firms, and of course he wants to be in the office full time because that's where he learns. I mean, actually he's quite happy to go on a Friday, but he wants the older people there so he can learn from them. And of course they are the ones that don't particularly want to be in the office because they've got kids or whatever, or they've got to the age where they don't really want to come in every day, but of course they're the ones that the younger ones learn from. So there's going to be this knowledge transfer succession that goes on massively. So there's going to have to be a little bit more prescription. It can't all be wanting to do what the employees want because there are other needs in there. So I think it was, as Roy was saying, from the me to the we, wasn't he saying that earlier? I think that the we needs to be held quite a lot because it's going to be quite easy to just let everybody do what they want to do. And it tends not to be that. In fact, in the DC Ryan paper, I'm not sure it's that paper, but one paper they did, they basically had a spectrum from being fully sort of autonomous, where people did whatever they want, and fully assertive dictatorial, saying what you want. And where do you meet in this spectrum? And interesting, their research showed the most effective way was 2/3 of the way. So it wasn't right over here, it wasn't in the middle, it was 2/3 of the way. So I think really listening to people is where you start, but make sure that you get enough for the we, enough for the organizational needs, which is less than, I think, 4 days and 5 days. If you look at this as a spectrum of 0 to 5 days, which it doesn't quite translate to, I think somewhere in this 2 to 3 days is probably where most people will be at. Yeah.
Some autonomy, but some guidelines to have.
Yeah, it's got, I mean, like we have it. Is it a Tuesday we meet or Thursday? And it's, I take this person to school and blah, blah, blah. Well, in the end, we're just going to have to say, right, it's this day and tough. That's where we are. And how you do that fairly, because of course, you can get into unconscious biases there and all sorts of things, but that's the intentional there. Conversations is really what's happening.
So one final quick question. Is the 2021 pandemic data iffy, as the pandemic was so exceptional, e.g. people worked long hours, they had nowhere to go, managers demonstrated care and being human, with pets interrupting calls, etc.
Yes, I mean, iffy, it's what it is. It was measuring what is. I'm actually pretty confident it was quite right. And as I said, actually, one of my summer jobs is to look at the data from this year, and it's still not settled down exactly, but let's see where we are. Because I looked at the data last year, which was what I was saying was going up and down. I just think it's changed more since then. So in a future webinar, I'll look at that more, Ian. But yes, there's been a huge transition, and it's not going to settle down in the same way, is it? Things have changed, and they change forever. Let's make them change for the better, I think really is ultimately what it is. And for the better, I mean creating happy, productive teams. It's got to work for both sides of the bargain here, employed. And hopefully that power balance is just slightly shifting, but just need to stay aware that systems can be brutal sometimes, particularly larger ones.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Nic, and thank you everyone for joining us. So we will be sharing a recording of this webinar with everyone who registered for it, and we would love your feedback as well. So we'll include a link to a feedback form. So if you can share your feedback on what you enjoyed, anything that you would like to see different, any topics that you're particularly interested in hearing Nic from Nic, that would be fantastic if you could share that. And yeah, if you have any questions, then please feel free to get in touch with us.
Yeah, and I think we're going to go for the first Tuesday in the month and do one a month. So yeah, please do suggest ideas. I'm really willing to look at things that people want to. And please, if you've enjoyed it, tell your friends, because we want to build up an audience here. So we're hopefully doing something that's a bit different. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.